This is Michelle at Simply Scape Handmade, and this is a video tutorial for basting a small quilt. I have here my backing fabric, which I've smoothed out on a flat, clean surface. It is right side down, so the wrong side is facing up. I've worked all my wrinkles out. We want to make sure that there's no kinks, crimps, or folds. And then we want to place our batting on top of that and smooth it out. Again, you don't want any kinks, creases, or wrinkles. Any little pieces of lint or gunk, we want to work those out and pick those clean. I like to start in the middle and smooth my way to the outer edges. When I first started quilting, I worked on a quilt piece that would be only about a foot in size, and I had the right side down, the batting, and then the quilt top right side up, and then I would baste it together. So this is just a small quilt. I do my large quilts much differently. Once we have all of the kinks and creases out of our batting, we want to make sure next to put our top on. And our quilt top is our pieced top or our printed top. For example, this is a whole cloth because it's just going to be a quilt sampler. This would be where the piecework is done. You want it facing up. So the right side of the top of your quilt, the piece that you will see the most on your bed or on the wall, is going to face up, the pretty side up. You want to start in the middle, smooth our way to the edges. Just like this. Now there's two different ways that I learned to baste a quilt when I first started, and I still use both of them just depending upon the project and upon what resources are available to me at the time. The first method I ever used to baste a quilt was thread basting, and basically I used a thread that was not the same color as the quilt top I was working on, and that was so I could see it really well when I was working. To thread baste a quilt, all you need is thread, scissors, and a needle. And I cut a length, about arm's length, of thread, snip it off, thread my needle, use a needle and thread that you are comfortable with and one that you feel like you can see easily when you're working. I put a knot in the end, and I like to start in the middle of the quilt and work toward myself. So we just take a stitch that's about an inch or a half inch in width, and I go horizontally like this, and then we're going to herringbone, which just means we're going to come down about 3 finger lengths and make another diagonal stitch. The purpose of this is to give stability to the quilt and keep us from getting puckers and tucks, but also to give us room to work. So we have an anchor stitch and a space, an anchor stitch and a space. And for this, I would just continue to work my way down until I run out of thread and needed to start again. When I baste a quilt, I work in quadrants, which means I start in the middle and work toward myself. And then I would move over and work this section to the edge, from the center to myself. Once that's complete, I'd come back to the center and baste this direction, from the middle to myself. And then I start working the other sections. If the quilt's small enough, I will reposition it and turn it so that I'm working again from the center toward myself. I find that the most comfortable, but you can do anything that you're more comfortable with. When you thread baste a quilt, the advantage is it's not going to fight you and wrestle with you when you put your quilt in a frame. You don't have anything lumpy or pokey. And when you want to quilt a section, all you do is take that section you're working on and snip that thread away, pull it out. Then I can quilt right here. You don't want to run over this thread because it gets anchored and stuck in there and it doesn't look very nice. Most often when I'm quilting these days, I don't use the thread as much. It's just a preference of mine. What I use instead are pins, and these are safety pins that have a little bend to them. They're made for quilting. They're made for basting a quilt. I like them because they're sustainable. They're something that I can have on hand and I can reuse again and again and again, where the thread, you use it once and you throw it away. Now, I spent years working from the center of my quilt and rocking this up and pushing my finger and doing this. Now, I have to say, that's not very fun, and that makes a very sore spot on your finger. Something a friend showed me was to use a spoon to lift that pin and save your finger a little bit. Again, I still go about 3 finger widths apart, and then use that spoon to push that pin up and hook it. That way, your finger isn't sore later. But another person yet introduced me to this little tool that they sell. It's called a quick clip, or this one is, but I'm sure there's many varieties. And it has little grooves right here. I don't know if you can see that, little grooves, so that when you use a basting pin and you poke it down in there, you push this down and it catches that pin so that you can hook it. So either method is fine, or you can use your fingers. I will warn you though, your fingers get really sore after a while and tender, and that's no fun. So when I work on my quilt and I baste, I want to make sure, first of all, that my layers are in the right order. I have the back wrong side facing up. I have my batting wrinkle-free and pressed. And then I have my quilt top right side facing up. Basically, your quilt sandwich looks exactly like your quilt will look once it's finished. Here's an example. This is a quilted sample piece. When I laid it down, this is the wrong side. And when it laid down, the wrong side is facing up. I had my batting, and I had the right side facing up. I pinned it, and I stitched it. And now, as you can see, this is it. No pins, simply quilted. When I first started quilting, I began with little squares like this. And the point in that was so I wasn't attached to the fabric emotionally. It didn't matter if I didn't like it or I messed it up. But I could use this as a tool to work on my stitch length, on my evenness, and on playing with different designs and how the fabric kind of puckers up when that design is finished. Now, many people say, well, that's a waste of fabric. It wasn't for me. When my children were small, they used these quilt sandwiches in their play. My girls used them in their kitchen, in their baby doll beds, and sometimes if it was a decorative top, we just hung it on their wall. Now that my children are older, my quilt sandwiches hang on the wall of my sewing room so that I can show students and myself what different designs look like when they're quilted into a fabric. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave it in the comment box or shoot me an email at simplyscafe@yahoo.com.